Welcome to MedHeads, the weekly show that brings a biopsychosocial focus to issues of the day, along with special guests who will showcase their expertise and enthusiasm about their field of practice. Your host, Dr. Fergal Armstrong.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong and welcome to MedHeads. Today we have Craig Payne with us, who is a group facilitator. Hello Craig, how are you?
Hi, I'm great, Fergal. How are you?
Very good, very good. So I suppose today we are going to talk about lapse and relapse. What does that mean? What is a relapse? What is a lapse? And what's the difference between the two?
So I suppose the length of time and how the use progresses. So a lapse is generally just a slip up, maybe a once off or a twice off. But a relapse is where things fall straight back into the old pattern and either go back to where they were or get a bit worse as well.
So let's talk about a lapse first of all. What would be the triggers for a lapse, and then what would a lapse look like?
Well, the triggers can be anything. Just might be sometimes even an overconfidence, thinking that things are going pretty well. So maybe just one won't hurt, or maybe I can just do it this weekend, or even that something goes wrong. Maybe lost a job, or just something as simple as an argument, or an argument with someone, and it might be just that default mechanism, that coping mechanism is to drop straight out and go and use.
Right.
And that would just be a sort of one-off.
And then what triggers a one-off to become a two-off, a three-off, and then a relapse?
Well, generally that's where the craving comes in, because for most addicts there's no such thing as just one. And that's I think the bit that sets them apart is the fact that one triggers two, triggers three, and sometimes it's been they've been fighting pretty hard not to use for quite a while, and all of a sudden they feel as, and there's that bit of disappointment. There's that thought of, oh damn, I've let myself down, or well, if I've done this, then hey, I'm going to really enjoy it and I'm going to make a go of this, and I'm going to make it a really good one tonight. And then they don't feel great the next day, and again the solution to that is to use again, and before you know it, you're back in the old pattern.
So it's that little voice in the head, you can do it, just a cheeky little one, you'll be all right. That kind of poisoned parrot talking that can perpetuate a lapse into a relapse, the craving and the maladaptive behaviors. Is that what you're alluding to? Yeah,
and I think that's the thing that sets people who live with addiction aside from other people who can just use occasionally. It's that sense of craving, and that sense that just one's not enough.
Yeah, one's not enough. Yeah. So
there's no such thing as just one. It sets off that craving, and then it's out of their control from there. It controls them. They don't control it.
That's a very important point to make, isn't it? That there's no such thing as just one for someone who's in a battle with substances. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. So, and that's generally the lesson that unfortunately has to be learnt the hard way. And you hear so often, like, I've tried to control it, and it's funny because this does affect everyone from all aspects of life, and a lot of the time they're able to control most other things within their life and find ways to work things, and but this is just something that they can't, and it's put down to a lack of willpower, or a lack of just not being able to, a weakness, and so that will to control, that try to control, is unfortunately a lesson that has to be learnt the hard way, until they realize that it does control them.
And I think this is an important point to make, that addiction is a neurobiological disease. It's not a moral failing. And addiction causes changes in the brain that diminish a patient's ability to say no, to resist temptation, to resist giving in to craving. And therefore, relapse is part of the disease process. So addiction is otherwise known as a chronic neurobiological disease of the mind that is prone to relapse. So therefore, relapse in itself should not be seen as a moral failing or as a weakness. It's a symptom of a chronic disease. And whilst we don't hope for it, whilst we don't, laud its arrival, we have to at least acknowledge the potential for it to occur in every patient, and therefore we need to start making interventions or providing interventions that minimize those risks. And that's where you come in, isn't it, Craig?
Yeah, well, that's one of the big things we try and help people out with, and I try and help people identify themselves is, well, all right, the relapse has happened, or the lapse has happened, because a lapse isn't necessarily just a one-off, but it turns into a relapse pretty quickly. If you get onto a lapse after the first time or the first couple of times, then you can prevent it becoming that full-blown relapse and getting a whole lot worse. But yeah, and I think it is part of the process. Well, that's down to the person just putting up their hand and saying they want the help again. And that's the feelings of shame and guilt sort of fall into things at this stage, and so I think the more we can just let people know, and I hope try and educate people that relapse and lapse might be part of the process, and that we're not judging that. Because that's one of the things that will keep people seeking that help is that shame that they feel, and that thought that this was going to be the time that they fix, and they feel like they've not only let themselves down, but they've let friends down, family down, and it's and the workers, whoever down, and it's just, we're just got to flip that thinking for them a little bit and help them understand that we're not judging them for the lapse or the relapse. I'm more proud of people that put their hand up and come back a whole lot quicker. I'm proud of anyone that comes back and seeks treatment, but it's a great thing that they do come back and seek treatment rather than stay stuck in the shame that's going to keep them in the relapse.
That's also an important point, isn't it? That therapists, I was going to say don't, but therapists should not judge clients for relapsing, and that extends also into the wider community. As difficult as it may seem to hear, loved ones and families need to acknowledge the possibility of relapse, and they should not judge a relapse in the way that we would judge crime. It's an opportunity for understanding the triggers and for resolving the triggers and for developing a way forward.
Well, to me, and that's the picture I try and paint, is it's a learning opportunity.
That's right.
And it's an opportunity to gain a greater understanding of self too, because you can stop and start to think, all right, well, what happened? Why did it happen? And how can I prevent it happening next time?
Yeah, those are important questions to ask in the context of a therapeutic environment which does not contain judgment.
That's right. Yeah. That feeling of being judged. The low self-esteem, that sort of stuff sort of comes into things, and that feeling of, as I said before, of having let everyone down. But and it's a fine line to walk too, between not encouraging the relapse and that, like, it's okay, it's going to happen, but it more than likely is going to happen, but it's encouraging that when the lapse happens to jump onto it quickly, and let's take it as a learning opportunity. Come and see me, and if that's part of the process from the beginning, part of the communication from the beginning, then things can be done a whole lot quicker about it. But so, again, it comes down to the person putting their hand up and saying, I want the help again.
You've alluded to the line, we don't cross the line into permissiveness. Is there a danger of permissiveness in dealing with relapse?
Yeah, well, I think, and that's one of the things is, there's the thought that relapse happens the second they pick up, but relapse has usually happened a long time before that. The relapse can be happening in the days, weeks, months leading up to that, and it's where the thought processes change and the thoughts start to, those little thoughts come into the back of the head, starting to think about, um, oh yeah, but I've been doing really well for ages, so maybe next month when I've got this party, or maybe when I've got this thing, I'll be able to do it that weekend, and or like, and just little thoughts start to sneak in, and we make that okay. So if at that point that they start to think, oh, well, that'll be okay. What would be better would be, what would be great is if they could be speaking to their counsellor, or whoever about that, and sort of working solutions to prevent it from happening in a month, or prevent it from happening. But
What
then
solutions would
rather
you
than
offer?
giving them self-permission. Well, there's a lot of solutions that can be used, say at the party or before. Like maybe if they were really worried about using, then it's they don't attend at all. Or if they're really worried, they partner up with someone while they're there, or they have someone on the phone who they can call, who they can just step outside and make a phone call to, and maybe they agree to go for a shorter amount of time. Maybe they go for an hour and then leave earlier. There's a lot that can be done throughout that.
Yeah. So the key thing is to actually recognize the early warning signs, the cognitions that develop the permissiveness to use drugs. It's not actually the use itself, as you've identified earlier. It's the thought process that may happen weeks, months before. That's a big challenge to people, isn't it? Especially to carers. How do you identify someone who's thinking about using, who hasn't yet used?
Ask them. And I suppose that comes down to the therapeutic relationship that you're trying to build, and that trust level, knowing that, it's great to be able to, for people to be able to talk and to say, yeah, I have been thinking about using, and it has become a little bit more dominant lately. And then we can start to look at, well, why has it become more dominant? And it's usually down to maybe a certain area of their life starting to cause a little bit more discomfort.
Yeah.
And a driving factor. Maybe they're really unhappy at work. Maybe they're really unhappy in a relationship. Maybe there's a bit of financial pressure that's actually going on. So the more trust that's built, the more we can open up, and the more a better understanding can be had, rather than trying to hide things. And so the more trust that's in that relationship, then the better.
Yeah. So that then really illustrates how important it is to have regular contact with an AOD counselor or some type of psychosocial support on an ongoing basis in a journey, through a journey of recovery, which really is never ending. You can't say, oh, I don't need any ongoing support. Recovery is a lifelong journey, really, and it's peppered. It has to be peppered by episodes of care.
That's exactly right. And I think too often this is looked at as just a short-term scenario, 6 sessions with a drug and alcohol counsellor, or or a couple of months, the 3 months of rehab, and then you're done. And that's why the 12-step programs exist from there, and that's why the 12-step programs are ongoing. That's why people are still going to 12-step programs 30 years down the track.
Yeah.
Because it's a maintenance program from there. And you look at the cycle of change, and you look at everything else, and you hit the maintenance phase. And if you're not maintaining it, there's the danger of slipping back again.
So I suppose it's a bit like, maintaining your car. You have to get your car serviced every 10,000 Ks. You need to get your cognitions and your commitment to abstinence and your recovery serviced every, 10,000 days, or what's the equivalent of 10,000 Ks?
every day. So
Every
it's
day,
just
yeah.
it's acknowledging it every day. You know, the
Yeah,
little sayings just for today and a day at a time. You know, but it is.
yeah.
It's acknowledging it every day and saying, all right, well, today's going to be another day where I do everything I can not to use.
Right,
Um, and yeah, that maintenance, yeah, is definitely needed.
right. So, I mean, I'm still fascinated by the idea that there are a number of triggers out there that can literally trigger people into a relapse. Have you come across the HALT mnemonic, HALT?
Hungry, angry, lonely, tired.
Yeah, and there's a couple of others in there as well. But yeah, do you want to talk us through about what that means? And do you find it useful?
Yeah, it's a really great tool, and it really just cuts things back to the basics and
Yeah,
um, understanding that that certain drivers can really add to the resistance levels, I suppose, and ability to say no at times, and how cravings can be confused for one thing. Um, when it could actually be solved with something else. And so, you know, it's been pretty well identified that feeling hungry
yeah,
can be confused with a feeling of wanting to use. So
yeah,
again, this is why one of the things that's encouraged through longer term treatment programs is getting back into that routine, and part of that routine being getting up, eating breakfast, eating lunch, eating dinner, and making sure you're eating healthy throughout the day. You know, and
yeah,
you know, there's a lot of sugar that comes into diets at times, and maybe it's craving. You know, there's people have big sugar cravings, and you know, maybe the cravings are for sugar or for food, and not for the substance, but the default method of is to start to think, you know, of the body and of the brain, is to look for that thing that gave them most pleasure
yeah,
in that time of craving. You know, the body's just craving food. Anger's a big one. Um, the so, sometimes people will pick a fight just to give themselves an excuse to go and use. Um, you know, but sometimes anger can build, and that's been their coping mechanism for so long, to control emotions and
yeah,
to balance emotions. That's been
yeah,
their operating level for so long that,
yeah.
oh, here we go, angry, bang,
Angry,
without, you
yes.
know, emotional impulse. It's just that no control over the emotional impulse to go and use
Yeah.
at that point.
I also put in anxiety in that A for, so I say A for angry and also A for anxious. I mean, how do you feel anxiety is a trigger for use?
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah,
You know, that feeling of discomfort. That's one of the things that drives people to use. Obviously, that if they're feeling uncomfortable, if there's the discomfort going on and that dis-ease,
yeah,
um, then yeah, then the the body's going to start to trigger them into looking for ways to combat that. And
yeah,
the quickest and easiest way the body will tell you to do that is to go and use again,
yeah,
and that's
yeah,
going to give that feeling of comfortability again. So
yeah. And
unfortunately,
then,
it usually brings with it that feeling of letting yourself down for using again too. So,
so part of group work that you do, does that involve dealing with or identifying and dealing with anxiety emotions? And how do you do that?
yeah, so one of the things we do at our facility is we have some DBT skill sets that we teach,
Yeah.
which is dialectical behavioral therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and we do that over 4 weeks with
Yeah.
two subjects each week. Oh, sorry, two sessions each week, and they
Yeah.
work around mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, and effectiveness.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, and that's usually a 6 to 12 month program that people would do um, to go through the DBT process. But yeah, we only give a pretty brief touch on it, but it always gets a really great response
Mm.
from the majority of participants that go through. Because yeah, that's where the struggles lie so often.
So basically, one could think about addiction as a lack of distress tolerance. That's fundamentally what it is, isn't it?
That's part of it, yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, the more, just I mean, just through there, like when we think about those four topics, the more with the mindfulness, the understanding of body and understanding of what's going on, and how to maybe control that, the distress tolerance again to be able to recognize when things are building, and it's once the emotional impulse kicks in too, as soon as that emotional impulse kicks in, then that can be really hard to regulate and to bring back down, and and just being able to communicate effectively what's actually happening, and better communicate with people to solve problems rather than just to walk away and use.
Yeah. So let's move on to L. What does L stand for?
Lonely.
Loneliness.
Lonely.
Is loneliness a trigger for use?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Loneliness and isolation. And that's because when you're alone, that's when the brain and that's when the mind can really start to play its biggest tricks. And it's easy to get stuck in a loop and stuck in that loop type thinking and just have the thoughts go on and on and on. And when there's no one else around, it's harder to find that circuit breaker. This is again why we encourage phone calls, and I encourage a big large support network. And even just to be getting out of the house and into groups of people. And this is why I encourage peer groups, and be they 12-step or smart recoveries or any other. There's plenty of organizations around that have peer workers or have different types of peer groups each week that people can go and join. And even things, men's shed, women's shed, bushwalking clubs, all those sort of outside activities, like outside of self, just to be around people and be socializing, because loneliness is a killer.
It is.
We're social creatures.
We are, and I suppose isolation really is the greatest. For me, it represents the greatest existential threat to personal survival. I mean, when you think about where we came from, when we were thousands of years ago, when we were battling saber-toothed tigers, etc., our survival depended on us being part of a tribe, all being around the same campfire. And the minute we become ostracized or excluded from that social group, and then we have to live alone in the jungle, we're goners, we're dead. So for me, isolation is actually a trigger for use, and also a manifestation of substance use disorder as well. So it's a cause and effect. And I suppose, the therapies to try and break down that vicious circle and pump some virtuosity into it are only going to do good. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And the loneliness builds the anxiety. And and that thoughts, and no one really wants to be alone. People enjoy their own company.
That's a very
at times,
provocative statement. Nobody wants to be alone.
Well, there are times, but we all enjoy. Well, I shouldn't say we all, but people enjoy their own company, and people do like to be by themselves. But there's times where we all need people to lean on. We all need people to talk to.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. Even those of us who feel that they are loners, that they don't need help, that they naturally prefer their own company, even those people at times need someone else to lean on. We cannot get through life on our own. We need social connectedness to actually survive. And that's someone who's not even dealing with substance use disorder. So it's all the more so important for people with substance use disorder to realize that they are so dependent on the quality of their networks. And it's the quality of their networks within substance use that keep people down, and it's also the quality of the networks out of substance use that can elevate people into recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the big one that I try and work with people on is establishing that set of connections that's best going to serve them. And this is again is why it is such an individual thing to go through, and there is the no one cure fits all, because some people are perfectly happy in their own company, and that's fine. That's totally great, but it's helping them understand when might be a time that they do need to enlist the support, and when
Yeah.
might be a time that,
Yeah.
and recognizing and helping them recognize that before it happens.
Yeah.
So, and that's again what leads to that relapse, not recognizing it quick enough,
Yeah.
or recognizing it but not taking the action quick enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, can lead to the relapse. But yeah, whether it's, and this is why we're the biopsychosocial, whether it's social or friends or an activity or financial support, whatever it is around that for them that they need the assistance with. It's just important that they have someone they know they can turn to if they need to.
So let's talk about the T. What does T stand for?
Tired.
Does it
So,
also stand
and
for
again,
thirsty?
yes, it does.
Yeah.
So,
Tell us about those,
um,
tiredness and thirst.
well, again, it's those the body's reaction to sending confusing messages, um, and and what the person with the substance use think the default position is to, when feeling uncomfortable, when feeling anything, to get back to that sort of level of what they class as normal, is to use. But the body's sending messages of just maybe needing some water, maybe needing to stop. But tired's a big one as well, and tired
Yeah.
contributes to a lot of other things where, you know, I know even when I'm tired and when I'm not running at 100%, a little bit more likely to have an emotional outburst, or to
Yeah.
not be able to control emotions as much as I'd like to,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that leads to a shorter fuse,
Yeah.
and that leads to wanting to go and use again.
Yeah.
So it's
So
just that
fatigue.
unfortunate default position.
Yeah. So fatigue really underpins the failure of all our prefrontal cortex, or cortices, that ability to say no, that to deal with cravings, to deal with life's problems. If we're tired, we're just not as good at it as we should be. And that then opens the door
No,
to potentially relapsing.
that's it. We're going to look for the, like,
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's how we look for the easiest and quickest way to
Yeah.
get that comfort level back to where
Yeah.
we want it, and that's to use.
That's to use. So really, if we're tired, we need to
And
get some sleep.
yeah, absolutely,
Don't go out for
absolutely.
that
And
cheeky little party. That
no,
just the
don't
one
go out
beer.
for the party. But
Yeah.
and tiredness even can can promote like eating and things as well. You're sitting up and
Yeah.
like you just want to use more energy. Yeah, a lot of the time people will turn to food and things at that time as well. But
Yeah.
sitting up late at night and what we really should be doing is getting some sleep. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, eating and doing the other things that aren't necessarily the best decisions at the time.
Sure. And thirsty. I mean, I think thirst comes into alcohol craving a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, and yeah, alcohol's dehydrating,
Yeah.
and then and when the body's dehydrated again, the decision making's not the best.
Yeah. And there's a big culture about rehydration socially, isn't there? Certainly in Australia. You have a hard day's work, you're dehydrated, you've been sweating, you've been working hard, down to the pub for a couple of bevies to try and first of all rehydrate and then start enjoying. But that's I think where we are societally primed to confuse thirst with the craving for alcohol.
Yeah, and alcohol only makes you thirstier. The more you drink, the thirstier
Yeah,
you get,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
and it's not actually fixing the problem. And then when you're dehydrated, you feel worse the next day too. The
Absolutely.
hangover kicks
Yeah.
in a whole lot worse.
So the cure for that is to
And then
drink
if you
more
feel
water.
should be to drink more water, but unfortunately that message can get confused with drinking more alcohol,
Yeah.
and
Right.
that's what the body
So
does. And as you
finally,
say, it's a there you go, you're right.
so finally, Craig, we need to wrap this up now because we've run out of time. What's the summary that you can give to people about thinking about a relapse?
Well, that relapse can be prevented. That it may be a part of the process, but it doesn't have to last forever. It doesn't have to get worse, and it's a learning opportunity. and hopefully it can be caught at the lapse phase, with a good relationship, with some acknowledgement, and to say, yeah, I don't want this to get to the relapse phase. And yeah, okay, it is can be part of the learning process, but it's more an opportunity to say, okay, what can I learn from this, and how do I prevent it happening again?
Thank you, Craig, for your never-ending pearls of wisdom.
Thanks, Virgil.
That's it for today's episode of MedHeads, and we look forward to your joining us again soon.